Okay, Sarah, we're at Beth Shearim. I love coming here. My groups always enjoy it, but you know, in all the years I've been coming, I have never seen a single Christian tour group come to this location.
How come?
It's hard to answer that question. I think they don't appreciate how important this is to an understanding of the Judaism of the first century when Jesus was here and the beliefs of Jews today. But this grave site we're standing in front of is where this fellow, you see his name here, it's Rabbi Yehuda. Now we would say Judah, but remember they don't have that J sound in their language, and so instead of saying Jonah, they would say Jonas, and they say Yehuda Han-Nasi. That means the prince. So Judah the prince, and they very much honor him because this is the fellow who put the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the oral law. What did Jesus say about the oral law? He condemned it. He condemned the Jews because they valued the oral law over God's word. And so it's their traditions.
Okay.
Yeah, their traditions. And so in time, they didn't want to record it. They wanted it to stay oral. They taught that God gave it to Moses, a written thing called the Torah, and then the oral law, and it passed down through the generations.
So it's never been recorded?
It had not been recorded.
Okay.
But then around the year 200, this fellow, Judah, decided we have to record it because there are almost no Jews left. They've all been wiped out. We've got to record the law.
Wiped out by who?
By the Romans. Let's sit down. Let me tell you that story. Okay. So now we have a second revolt. It happens because Hadrian brought a statue of Jupiter to the Temple Mount. Set it up there. That was too much for the Jews. A rebellion began. A riot began. Bar Kokhba led it.
Okay.
This fellow named Bar Kokhba.
Leader of the Jews.
Yeah, he became the leader, and he was very successful at first. He drove the Romans out of the whole nation, and did so by killing lots and lots of Roman soldiers. But then the Romans brought reinforcements. In fact, they brought soldiers as far away as Britain. They were determined that they could not let this stand. They had to wipe out the Jews, and they did. By 135, they were completely destroyed. So we date that from 132 to 135. But the result of that is this oral law, which the Jews taught was given to Moses. They say Moses was given a written law, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and an oral law. And so they needed to just pass that oral law on orally. And it had been passed on just orally as their teaching. But now we're at the point where there are almost no Jews. We believe there was about 500,000 Jews killed during the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and about another 500,000 taken away as slaves. And most of those would have died very soon because slave life was incredibly brutal. Those put in mines could work 7 days a week, all through the year, work long hours, hard work, and would just die at a young age. So yeah, it's hard, brutal what would happen. So now we have no oral law that may be preserved because there are so few Jews. What are we going to do? And so Judah Anasi, Judah the prince, decided we have to record it. Now the Jews weren't allowed in Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. They were not allowed to be near Jerusalem, not even on the Mount of Olives. They could not get near Jerusalem. So this is where that work was done. And so the oral law that Jesus condemned was written here. And if you want to know what it was Jesus did not like about what the Jews were teaching, what all those teachings were, you can study the oral law. Have the Mishnah, the oral law in writing now.
Okay.
They also have commentary on the oral law. That's called the Gemara. You take the Mishnah and the Gemara together, and that's what we call the Talmud.
Okay.
And it's huge. I mean, we're talking something like the Encyclopedia Britannica, about this long in print, that tall, this wide as far as books, just a massive number of books. And to learn it all would be such a difficult task, but that's the goal of a very religious, we'll say Hasidic Jew, to learn the Talmud. And they value that more than the Bible. They will consider it above the Bible.
I see.
Yeah, I know that because I was told that in a dinner with a bunch of Jews one evening of Shabbat, and I was eating with them, and I asked that question. Now tell me, what do you consider more important, the Bible, the Torah, or the Talmud? And the first fellow responded, they're the same, they're equal. And the next fellow said, no, they're not equal. It's the Torah, because think about it. God says, have my law before your eyes and on your heart always. But if you just had the Bible, you'd think you have to put those scriptures right over your eyes. You couldn't see anything. You'd walk into walls. But the Talmud tells us what he means is to wear phylacteries. So we put them across our arms, and there's a box right here. We put those special scriptures there, so now it's over our heart. And of course, we put phylacteries here, tefillin, on our head, so the box is right here, and that's before our eyes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. And all through the Talmud, you find things that you might say are interesting. In fact, lots of superstition, lots of nonsense, a lot of medical things that are just absolutely, you can't believe that anyone actually thinks this is from God, but that's what they teach.
Well, I mean, have you ever played that game called the telephone?
Yep.
So, as these people are passing down this oral law, how do we know that it's staying
Good question.
intact? I mean,
Yeah.
they might be adding things to it or leaving things out.
I have no doubt that happened over and over and over. But know this, in the days of Jesus, there are two teachers that are the most important. You have Hillel. He was alive when Jesus was born still. And then you had Shammai, who was alive as Jesus lived. And those two had competing schools. The school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. They make up more of the Talmud than any other two teachers, any other two rabbis. And then their students fall into the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai.
Okay.
Lots of different rabbis quoted in the Talmud. And what's interesting to me is very often they contradict each other. So how can this be inspired by God? It's not the Bible. It's not the Bible.